Very, very important that we remind ourselves that we do have a world-class education system here in Scotland. You look at what is told to us by the OECD, by the International Council of Education Advisors. They recognise the good work that happens day in, day out in Scottish education. The fact that we've got the highest proportion of adults in tertiary education anywhere in the EU, that we're actually scored 4th highest in the world by PISA on global competence, the 4th highest in the world. Now, you're not going to read that many times in our papers and hear that much in debate, but it's important we recognise that.
Where we are just now needs to be better, no question about that. I think it's interesting in the international league table, Scotland is about average in terms of the OECD, but in a separate study undertaken by the OECD looking at global competencies, Scottish young people do very well. And of course, Curriculum for Excellence, the nature of the curriculum reform in Scotland was very much geared towards building those kind of broader global competencies. So when we talk about, where the education system is good, bad or indifferent, there's a lot of factors you need to take into account.
So the second clip that I played there was from an STV discussion from a few days ago pertaining to educational reform. And the initial clip that I played was several months ago at the SNP's conference, where Shirley-Ann Somerville at the time was Education Secretary. And it's funny how in both clips, it's the first time I've heard something similar in terms of the context where they will sort of acknowledge that Scottish education at present is a bit of a shit show, but they manage to sort of brush away any concerns and justify their lack of action in this regard by saying, well, at least our global competency stacks up. But just what is global competency? I'll come on to that in just a second. It's something that I've covered before in a video, but I think it kind of got lost in the sea of clips that I'd posted at the time pertaining to the conference itself. But obviously, Scottish education is on the verge of being quote-unquote reformed, which isn't exactly it's sounding too promising when you really start to read into it, such as this, the Hayward Review, Reforming Qualifications and Assessments, something that was mentioned in that segment, which I'm not going to play the entirety of, but just if you come down, learning context would be a project which would show knowledge, skills, abilities and competencies in action across different subjects, e.g. project work on topics such as global issues, aka climate change, social justice or migration. Now explain to me just why these would be topics that would come up in a school environment. Well, that's right, because yet again, irrespective of whomever it is that's doing the talking, these topics continuously come up, whether it's learning for sustainability implemented by the Scottish Government many years ago, whether it's the UNCRC, whether it's climate change related education, global citizenship education, etc., etc. There is a common theme that emerges, and it is always the same: the normalisation of migration, while simultaneously implementing alongside it social justice, as well as climate change. And then we have this publication here from Professor Ken Moore, putting learners at the centre towards a future vision for Scottish education, where he says here that in June of 2021, he was commissioned by the Scottish Government to provide, quote-unquote, independent advice on aspects of education reform in Scotland, specifically including designing the implementation of the recommendations for structural and functional change of the Scottish Qualifications Authority, as well as Education Scotland, which arose from a report, Scotland's Curriculum for Excellence into the Future, by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, which we will be coming back to in due course. He then says that throughout this, he's adopted an evidence-based approach, listening to and triangulating the views and ideas of children and young people, head teachers, lecturers and other practitioners, parents and carers, and a range of other interested stakeholders to inform his recommendations, or to help form his recommendations. But emphasis on the children and young people aspect of this, because, again, premeditation at play here, problem, reaction, solution, political grooming, in the sense that children, in this context, are already products of their environments. Children that are already being subjugated to learning for sustainability, global citizenship education, etc., and that will become pretty apparent in just a second. So the recommendations in this report take into account and align with wider areas of policy and the Scottish Government's priorities for children and families in Scotland. priorities around closing the poverty-related attainment gap, child poverty, reducing youth unemployment, the national work or race equality and anti-racist education, or REREP for short, which is critical race theory. Every single panel that the REREP programme has got under its belt, 4 different panels, all of them riddled with critical race theorists, something I've showcased on a myriad of occasions before, more so last year as opposed to this year. But it's not gone away, it's just gone relatively quiet. But this report, that's part of a wider project to reform our curriculum, is taking into consideration not just critical race theory, but of course the UNCRC, of course, because it's a game changer, as it says there. Yeah. 1,210 primary school aged children engaged with the online or downloadable toolkits and took part in conversations facilitated by adults known to them, including 53 members of the Children's Parliament, 394 secondary school aged children and young people engaged with the toolkits designed for them, again facilitated by adults known to them. This included 25 members of the Scottish Youth Parliament's Learner Panel, and a total of 3,889 12 to 18-year-olds responded to the online survey. Now, of course, he says down below ever so slightly that the outcomes from these engagements and consultations with children have been provided separately, but that's not really the point of this video. As really it's more things like this attention. The current generation of learners see climate change as one of the most significant issues facing our future, and as such must be recognised as a key driver influencing the future of our education system. Right? So, again, children being products of their curricular environment are already of the belief that climate change is an imminent threat to our future, or their future even, and thus wish to see change implemented to rectify the problems that are coming down the pipeline, courtesy of man-made climate change. And of course, this report, a report that's part of a wider project to reform our curriculum, will take on board these concerns. As it says that recognition and celebration of Scotland as an ethnically diverse society with equal status being given to the voices of those most often unheard. For example, those from different denominations and minority ethnic and Gaelic communities. In the grand scheme of things, Scotland, as of the 2011 census, was not that ethnically diverse, so on the face of it, that's a relatively misleading recommendation, has to be said. But of course, this is all part of the normalisation process, is it not? Because we have to have children believe that Scotland is diverse. They have to become accustomed to the concept that it's normal to assume that Scotland has always been diverse, will always be diverse going forward, and it's a natural process of globalisation. It's also a reference to the need for the development of values, attitudes, knowledge and skills to be significantly strengthened in the context of learning for sustainability, bringing education for sustainable development and global citizenship education and outdoor learning together. This was felt to be particularly important given the increased profile and relevance of climate change to the current and future generations of children and young people. Again, how would all these things really be the sort of thing that children would be considering, suggesting going forward? And why is climate change a topic of discussion for children? Oh, that's right. Again, sort of products of their environment, are they not? Which of course leads me to global competence itself, and how it all ties into the things that I have just showed at the beginning here, but as brief as it was. Global competency is a multi-dimensional construct that requires a combination of knowledge, skills, attitudes and values successfully applied to global issues or intercultural situations. Global issues refer to those that affect all people and have deep implications for current and future generations. Right? Developing global competence is a lifelong process, but it is one that education can shape. Why is it important for students to develop global competence? Global competence can help young people to develop cultural awareness and respectful interactions in increasingly diverse societies. By caring about global issues and engaging in tackling social, political, economic and environmental challenges, thus global competence supports the Sustainable Development Goals, all becomes a bit more clear. And all of a sudden, the clips that I played at the very beginning of my video are a bit more odious in nature. So, the SNP have done fuck all to better education in Scotland. Judge me on education, Nicola Sturgeon once upon a time said. Attainment gap, non-existent in terms of reduction. You know? And as for numeracy and whatnot, all that shit is mediocre at best. The only thing that they've got to write home about is their ranking in global competency. And global competency is defined as effectively being an assessment on how well the youth in our country have adapted to learning for sustainability. How much of a good global citizen is your son or daughter? A wee bit further into Sustainable Development Goals, for anybody that's not aware, presume you are at this point though. If we come on to it, and we go to Sustainable Development Goal 4 in particular, you will come to find a very interesting point in the target page. So, good education, or quality education even. Read more about it. And it says here that providing quality education for all is fundamental to creating a peaceful and prosperous world. Education gives people the knowledge and skills they need to stay healthy, get jobs, and foster tolerance. Targets, and 4.7 in particular. So, by 2030, ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and Goal 4 effective learning outcomes. Right? And then it says a wee bit further down that by 2030, eliminate gender disparities in education and ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, Indigenous people, and children in vulnerable situations. Right? By 2030, ensure that all youth and a substantial proportion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. It doesn't matter if they're not very good at it, though, in the Scottish context, because, hey, we've still got global competency to brag about. But 4.7 is where it's at. Where it says, by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable developments, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable developments. We were one of the first, if not the first country, to put this into our education system, learning for sustainability. There is a myriad of cancerous concepts that are similar in nature, which promote the same thing. And when it's all said and done, the only thing that we've got to brag about is a fucking high ranking in global competency. Yeah. So let's go a bit further, shall we? Many education systems seek to create an open, diverse, and tolerant society, as education can play a significant role in countering racial, ethnic, and national prejudice among children and adolescents, with education for living in an interconnected and diverse world, potentially being able to contribute to forming generations of citizens who care about global and intercultural issues, and who are willing to take action for sustainable development and well-being, collective well-being. Sustainable development. It's just everywhere you turn, it's there. Everywhere you turn. To what extent are global and intercultural skills taught at school? School principals were asked two sets of questions about the inclusion of global issues and intercultural learning in their school's curriculum, with PISA 2018 results showing that global issues are commonly included in school curricula, with the most common topic being climate change and global warming. But on the contrary, the least common topic of the 7 proposed in the questionnaire was global health, such as pandemics, or epidemics even. In many countries and economies, intercultural learning skills are also covered by school curriculums, with the most common topic covered being respect for cultural diversity. The table here shows that climate change, or global warming, whatever you will, is the most popular subject that seems to be promoted and taught in schools. Follows swiftly on by respect for cultural diversity, which has to be said is a relatively malevolent term, or subject header, I should say, because in reality what that is promoting, normalizing, and pushing for it to be completely accepted that the ever-changing demography of your country is normal and it should be respected and accepted. You might even notice the term multiculturalism seems to have overtaken any notion that a nation is predicated on the back of people with a shared common ancestry. It's all about culture now. And then we've got migration. Why is migration being taught? I know why. Rhetorical, but again, Shirley Ann Somerville, as well as the individual who was on STV News just a few days ago, their answer to sort of brush away any sort of criticism and concerns pertaining to a flatlined education system, trying to brag about global competency, which is fucking defined as normalizing political concepts. Students' attitudes and dispositions are positively and significantly associated with a number of global competence learning activities in which they are engaged in at school. Those associations remain positive after encouraging for students in schools' socio-economic profiles, with the strongest associations being found in their interest in learning about other cultures, awareness of global issues, agency regarding global issues, and self-efficacy regarding global issues. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a few in particular that I wanted to bring up. It says here that I participate in classroom discussions about world events as part of the regular instruction. I analyse global issues together with my classmates in small groups during class. I'm often invited by my teachers to give my personal opinion about international news. We read newspapers, look for the news on the internet, or watch the news together during classes. Now, even to ask these questions to students in schools would give off the impression, well, obviously it must be the case if they're saying that they do these things in school, but in order to be in a position to be asked these questions, naturally, the assessment is based on whether or not this has happened to you as of yet. You know? These are concepts that have already been introduced into schools. All that's happening here is kids are discussing within the confines of the information that they've been presented via their teacher, via the news, via government-funded or government-instructed news. And the laugh of it all is they're told simultaneously that they're being taught how to critically think. So, of course, the Global Competency Assessment offered a tangible opportunity to provide the global community with the data it needed to build more peaceful, equitable, sustainable societies through education. Yeah. The world's growing complexity and diversity presents both opportunity and challenge, apparently. And here's one of these paragraphs that I find relatively telling, in all honesty, because globalization is the sort of term they're trying to push, the concept they're trying to push. Internationalism is another one. The natural response to somebody who opposes concepts such as that would be somebody who undertakes nationalist principles. And we can't be having that. So to ensure that there's no nationalist sentiment in the future, nationalist sympathies, they're trying to stamp that out from as young as possible. As it says here that they've watched in recent years waves of nationalism, racism, and anti-globalism sweep across countries around the world, making global competence education that much more critical. To put it simply, the number one solution to combating nationalist fever is increasing global understanding. What happens that both the UN and the OECD have prioritised global citizenship and global competence education in recent years, alongside learning for sustainability, in the Scottish context anyway. Globally competent individuals are aware, curious, and interested in learning about the world and how it works. They recognise the perspectives and worldviews. This is a matter of subjectivity and truth, because there's right and wrong, there's truth and there's untruths, and then there is viewing the world exactly how these people wish you to view the fucking world. And that's what they're doing to children. This is ridiculous. It's just evil. At the end of the day, it's globally competent individuals who will be able to solve the world's seemingly intractable problems. And it's our world's educators to prepare those individuals for their future, their global futures. Oh, yeah. Schools can make an important difference. They're the first place where children encounter the diversity of society. They can provide students with opportunities to learn about global developments that affect the world, via a politicized lens, of course, and their own lives. They can teach students to develop a fact-based and critical worldview. Oh, yeah. Who gets to decide what's fact-based and what's not? And then they finish off by saying, and they can promote the value of diversity. Well, there you go. It's like, yeah. So just to conclude all this, when they brag, or when you hear them brag, about Scotland ranking so high in global competency in the world tables, just remember how that's fucking defined.